right, everybody, welcome to our new episode here of the 121% podcast. We're so excited to have you here today because we have an incredible guest, someone that I am very excited to introduce you to. His name is Cesar Lostaunau. He is with Century 21 Real Estate, the corporate entity there, and he leads diversity and inclusion for our brand. That's his mission. Great background both in the public and in the private sector before joining Century 21. Is also a faculty member of her Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coaching Center with the Forum on Workplace Inclusion, and is also a recipient of the Diversity MBA Top 100 Under 50 Executive and Emerging Leader Awards. And I'm happy to be able to say I get to work alongside this amazing man as he helps our brand continue our relentless mission to expand and our reach and who we welcome into our family. We have one of our house habits, if you will, our values is expand the neighborhood, and that is all about Cesar. So welcome, Cesar, to the podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm just as honored to work and get to serve you and all the system members that we have. So thanks for the chance to share my story and hopefully inspire some of your listeners in terms of how intentional they are or can be about diversity and inclusion within their own practice.
Absolutely. So tell us, I kind of gave a high level, but, talk to us about your journey. Like, did you, we were like 5 years old, and when everybody else was saying, I want to be a fireman or an astronaut, you're like, I want to lead diversity and inclusion. Like, how did your path lead you to this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's a great question because not many of us really wake up in the morning just think, I want to help others in this way, right? With diversity and inclusion in mind. Like many of my fellow practitioners, Kevin, my journey kind of started one in sort of regular business, if you will. But you should know that because I have an immigrant background, my diversity, equity, and inclusion journey actually started when I first moved to the US from Peru at the age of 8. So that's when I recognized that I was different, that I was part of the other, if you will. Moving to Chicago from Peru, obviously a Spanish native language and culture into the Euro dominant US Chicago culture. So
Mm-hmm.
my journey started a long, long time ago, ever since I was a kid, where I recognized I was different. I thought differently, I spoke differently. But more professionally, I should say, that journey started about 10 years ago at my most recent employer, Allstate Insurance, before I came over to Century 21, where I was tapped on the shoulder to lead an employee resource group. And through that work, through really understanding the ERG, employee resource, business resource group concept, ideas of these affinity groups based on different groups, if you will, like in my case, the Latino ERG, where I served as president, that's when I got more into the formalities around diversity and inclusion. And that's when I was inspired to get a certificate through one of the universities in the East Coast, said, you know what, I'm going to get certified in this. And then I was very intentional later in my life, after more than 20 years of professional experience, where I said, you know what, let me take this a lot more serious because I love what I'm doing as an ERG leader and actually practice it day to day, not just as a volunteer ERG leader. And that's where I am today, the Director of Growth Markets, Diversity and Inclusion at Century 21, where I get to practice a personal passion and purpose, helping others. And now I get to do it in the real estate industry.
Yeah, and this one thing I love about our brand and our parent company, Anywhere, is that it's a company that is devoted in every respect to expanding the reach and making everybody feel welcome, has been a part of leading the effort in Congress to get the Fair Housing Act expanded. So it's a great company to work with, and their investment in creating the position that you have shows how serious they are in making sure that we increase diversity inclusion. You look at our industry, I pulled the latest report from NAR, which is the 2021 member survey. And while we're making progress as an industry and as an organization, we have a long way to go. I mean, you look at right now, 78% still Caucasian in the latest report, 9% Hispanic, African American 7%, Asian Pacific Islander, 6%, American Indian 1%, and then other 3%. I mean, what do you think we have to do as an industry to be able to see those numbers be more reflective of America?
The short answer to that question is that we need to be more intentional about embracing others. And you're right, Kevin. We need to do it as an industry. We at Century 21 are an outlier because we've invested in the role that I have on purpose. And I have a very strict mission mandated by our CEO, President CEO Mike Meadler, to say, Caesar, we need to be more intentional about reflecting the marketplace. And that's what I get to do every day. I wish more and more of our industry partners would do that, regardless of whether it's in real estate as realtors, on the lending side, on the appraisal side. So, just like you, I think about this from the whole ecosystem. Because if we have diverse representation in every step of the journey for someone to get into a home, I fundamentally believe we will advance home ownership rate within those communities that you called out
Mhm.
much more rapidly. We're behind in all the diverse demographics when it comes to the comparison of home ownership rate. And that's really what it fundamentally boils down to, right? It's how do we get more people into homes? So
Right.
I think about the statistics like you do, which is okay, what does that practitioner makeup look like?
Hmm.
Because that should be reflective of the demographics in the country. At the same time, I think about the home ownership gaps that we have in some of those marginalized communities and say, hey, if we bring in more diverse agents, realtors, and even corporate leaders, we can help fill that gap of home ownership rate that we have with marginalized communities and get as many people in homes as possible, eliminating or minimizing the discrimination and all the hurdles that happen in the lending process, in the appraisal process, and all the different steps that homeowners need to go through in order to get that set of keys to welcome themselves in their new home or another home.
Yeah, it's something for our office here in Orlando at OneBlue. We've been really intentional about in making sure that we celebrate our diversity. I mean, compared to the National Association of Realtors at 78% Caucasian, we're 28% Caucasian. We're 42% Hispanic Latino compared to 9. We're 20% African American compared to 7, right? And I think, we have a very strong family culture. And I think that's why, it's, the number one word our team tells us that to describe, they used to describe our office and our culture as family. And it's because we welcome everybody. And regardless of your age, not regardless, but your age, your life experiences, whether it be through race or where you're an immigrant or not, all that affects your perspective on life. And when we can bring all of those perspectives to the table to have meaningful conversations, that's when we're the best we can be. And that's when we have an agent advisory council where that is very diverse. And we're very intentional about that so that way we can make sure that everyone is represented at the table. And it's just something brokers and leaders, like Mike has done and other leaders need to do to make sure that we're being more intentional, as you said. So how can, if I'm a broker that doesn't have very much of a diverse office or another brand or another company, or maybe even might have someone who's outside the industry, how can someone be more intentional to increase their diversity?
Great question, and I'm happy to share that. But one thing before I do answer that question is I just want to commend you because you and your office are an outlier in the industry with what you're doing, with your intentionality. And I'm happy to unpack what I would recommend and then would really love your input on how you've been doing it as an example, almost as a case study for others, for your listeners to understand, specifically what can they do to lead with that intentionality. But I'll share this with you because I think it's an important point based on what you just mentioned, Kevin, which is you should know and your listeners should know that the evolution of diversity and inclusion is leaning more and more into what you're already doing. And what I mean by that is the whole notion of what we call DIBS in this profession, in this practice of diversity and inclusion. DIBS represent diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And that's exactly the recipe that you're doing. That's one of the intentionalities that I would call out. You are very purposeful about making sure that everyone has this communal, familia feel, if you will. Well, that's making sure that your culture is one that embraces everyone, that they feel like they have that sense of belonging. When you do that, by the way, Not only do you help attract diversity, but you actually help retain diversity. And that's key for a business leader like you. But I would also encourage any realtor to think about that with their teams, with their staff persons, to make sure that they don't just sort of leave the belonging part of D&I out of the equation, that they lead into what's, I would say, more forward thinking in the D&I arena, which is diversity, inclusion, and belonging, which is what you're doing. That helps with the retention. When it comes to attraction, especially for a realtor who may not be in a very diverse market, as an example, or a practitioner, I mean, there are the two simple things that I would encourage anyone to think about just to start. And that's why I'm saying just start easy, if you will. One is very internal focus and one is very external focus. Internally, I believe you need to be a student of the business. And what I mean by this is you as a realtor need to understand the different cultures, read up on, for example, some of the most powerful trade organizations that serve diverse market, publish terrific reports about some of those constraints, challenges, and opportunities in those segments of the market. I would encourage you to look at the most recent report that's published by the Real Estate Alliance, LGBTQ plus Alliance, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, the ARIA, the Association of Asian American Real Estate Professionals. So, what I'm encouraging anyone to do to be intentional about understanding and even attracting and retaining is to be a student of the business and read those reports. Externally, it's also very simple. It's stepping out of your office, stepping out of maybe your comfort zone, your network, to really understand those communities by interacting with members of those communities and or allies. Go to an event. We happen to be recording this during Pride Month in June. This is a terrific opportunity for anyone who wants to understand further this emerging market opportunity that we have with the LGBTQ plus community to attend an event, to attend something with open eyes, with an open mindset, to understand, to learn how you could serve that market. We just wrapped up, as you may know, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month during May. These are the intentional months of the year where any practitioner can say, you know what, let me do something different and get out to an event, interact with someone on purpose, get to know them, maybe even set up a coffee chat or lunch and help you grow your business. You do that internally, you do that externally. I can guarantee you, you could attract more diversity to your team, to your office, and more importantly, be more culturally attuned to figure out how to better serve that market to help increase with some of the home ownership gap rates and help you grow your business.
Yeah. I think for us, one of the biggest pluses that helped us kind of kickstart being a very diverse group is our real estate school. Having that, helping feed our recruiting in the early days, um, you know, part of what I think our struggle is, and if you look at a lot of rosters of agents at brokerages, you're going to see a dominant ethnic group in certain brokerages, right? Whether it be African American or maybe this brokerage is Hispanically heavy or Caucasian heavy. So if I am a member of, if I'm Latino and I look at a brokerage and there's no Latinos or maybe only 1 and 2 out of 50, that might not be a brokerage I want to consider. Same thing with African Americans. So, we do a great job. We committed to having, a media person on our team. So we record all our events and, we share them more just for kind of like, our version of the yearbook from high school, right? It's kind of good to look back at some of the fun. We share it with the agents. But having that it allows us to be able to showcase our talent and showcase who we are, as a company and as a group, so that when others are looking at us, they say, oh, hey, this is a place that just organically, I've never have gone out in the very beginning at all. I mean, and more so lately, I'm trying to be more intentional about outreach to make sure that other communities are aware of this as a career opportunity, especially when you look at, 7% of African Americans are of our realtor makeup as a whole. What can we do to reach out to those communities to help them understand this is a great opportunity to be able to create generational wealth, not just earn a lot of money. So many people look at real estate, I can make, they see the HGTV, I can make a quick buck. This is a way you can break the cycle and create generational wealth. And I come from a very poor family. So, I may be a white boy, but I'm gay, and I come from South Louisiana. My dad was military, right? So he was enlisted, so not an officer. So, there were days like, hot dogs and mac and cheese. Like, it was like we didn't have these big steak dinners. My mom cut coupons. Military salaries aren't the greatest. So this was something for me that I could be able to use my career to create that generational wealth. So how can I help others do that? And how can we be more intentional in that outreach? But so going back to kind of where I started, and I got off on a tangent there, but it's just showcase your culture and be proud of who you are. My other question for you is, especially and I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about it at all. Obviously, we're filming this in June of 2022, and there are a lot of efforts across the country politically, and I'm not going to get political whether you're left or right, we love everyone. But how can leaders that may want to be more intentional with increasing their diversity and inclusion do so without also being seen or judged as almost being reverse discriminatory, right? So if I'm targeting and doing outreach, I should say, to African Americans and Hispanics, someone come back, well, why aren't you? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
It does, and I think I'm glad you brought that up as a question, because I think many people are mindful of this. Like, they don't want to offend, or they don't want to they want to manage their perception, perhaps, to say, hey, well, I don't want to seem like I'm excluding others when I'm very, very inclusive. Others may not see that. I think you bring up a great point that a lot of people think about but often don't talk about. Here's my take on that. At the end of the day, I fundamentally believe you, as a leader or any practitioner who's in this business, should always lead with inclusivity in mind. Meaning, if you are intentional about doing this, regardless, and seeing people for who they are, by the way, and regardless of what segment you're focused on in what particular month, but don't do it at the expense of others, you will be highly successful. Where I think many people miss the mark is they sort of over index in one group or another at the expense of other, and that is not an inclusive leader. That's why I start with, you need to be an inclusive leader regardless of your title, whether you're leading your team, you're leading yourself, or you're leading a company like you are, Kevin. If you lead with inclusivity, you are mindful as to what you're doing for all the segments that you want to attract into your office, and you're not doing them at the expense of others. Yes, sometimes we have limited resources and we have to make some decisions that say, well, I only have a certain amount of money and I can only invest in this versus that. And that's okay if that's the priority this year. But how about next year? How about the year after? If you're leading with a 360 lens of everything that's in your marketplace and being intentional about leveraging that, and it could be maybe next year I will. And in full disclosure, we have to do that at Century 21 as well. We want to serve all communities in full disclosure, but we've made a conscious strategic decision to focus on some where we see a lot of growth potential. Get that down packed, do it really, really well, so that as we're cascading to other communities and serving them the way we want to serve them,
Mm-hmm.
we are thoughtful and taking all the learns for some of the prioritization that's happening today. And that's because of limited resources. And that's what I would encourage any of your listeners to think about and consider, to say, sometimes you have to make those tough calls. You have to be mindful of your conscious effort, what you're doing to lead. And yeah, you're going to get some noise. Some people are going to say, well, you're doing that. What about me? And what about others? Well, that's a scarcity mindset as opposed to an abundancy mindset. And when you lead with inclusivity and have that abundancy mindset, you're going to filter that noise out, and you're going to say, you know what? I'm staying on track. I'm going to serve those communities, just not now. Does that answer your question and help?
It does, and as I say all the time to our peers, is that if you're getting noise, as you call it, you're doing something right.
That's a great point, way of looking at it too. The disruptors, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the most successful entrepreneurs out there. They disrupted, right? Oprah Winfrey, like him or not,
Elon
Jeff
Musk.
Bezos,
Mhm.
Steve Jobs,
Right.
Richard Branson. They all broke the mold, right? They challenged the status quo, and that's who we are.
Like you, Kevin.
Yeah,
Well, I'll put you in that category because all of you are outliers, I would say. You're doing this on purpose. You're disrupting the norm. You're asking the why and the why not. And that's part of the reason why you're so successful and why you attract so much diversity. So sometimes I want to make sure I call that out for you and your listeners is that when we're intentional about things, and sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's even unconscious, it just happens organically. But then, behind the scenes, there's something going on there. The videos that you're showcasing, for example, well, guess what? They're giving signals to people who watch those videos to say, hey, I belong there, or there are others that look like me, think like me, see like me, and great, because that's where I could thrive and be more successful. That's good for them, good for you, good for the whole ecosystem, even the home buyer.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of for real estate agents, for those that are listening that are agents, some of the ways you can be intentional is in your marketing, and this will help you stay clear of fair housing issues as well. When you look at your website and your marketing material, are you including diverse representations in your marketing, in your photos, able-bodied and disabled, older people, younger people, single parents, full families. Make sure that you are being thoughtful or intentional in your marketing. You go to our school website, for example, and I reference that only because it has a lot more just stock photography versus our broker site that has a lot more houses, right? But you will find all that. We have people, members of our military. We have, folks who have disabilities. We have, every race you can think of. If I can find it, we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful and inclusive in our marketing so that someone looking at our marketing knows that we welcome everyone.
Yeah, and that to me is sort of that external facing, being very deliberate like you are. And I think it's relatively easy, is what I would consider any practitioner to think about. It's just looking at the work in a different lens to say, okay, is the diversity of my office being reflected in my marketing material? Or is the diversity of my community, my marketplace, reflective of the community? And I'm glad you call out all the different dimensions of diversity, Kevin, because in this space, I think sometimes diversity needs to be even demystified for people. You hear the word often. It's obviously after the murder of George Floyd, it's been all over the news. It's certainly been all over corporate settings and a lot of organizations scrambling to bring in some diversity strategies into their work. But what you call out is an important part of diversity that's often missed and overlooked, which is that diversity has multiple dimensions. Some of it is visible, some of it is not visible. So you need to even think about that in your marketing and how you think about your own diversity strategy. Because in our world, it could be the difference between suburban, urban, and even rural. So diversity, and the way I kind of think about it, it's about the other. And you need to think about that even in how you practice and how you think about diversity in your work. It's again visible and invisible. Just being mindful and seeing that person for who they are is what's going to help you put together a robust strategy that's helping ensure you're reflecting everyone that you want to reflect in your marketing or attract, I should say.
Yeah, I'll share a quick story. Early in my career, I worked for Disney, and one of the things going through back then, you start out in a course called Traditions, and Traditions was almost a week long. It was like at least 3 days, if not 5. Now I think it's a half a day. But one of the things they hammered is we don't have disabled guests at Walt Disney World. We have guests with disabilities because the guest should always come first before the disability. We have to put the guest experience first. So how can we make sure that every guest who has a disability is able to experience our parks and our attractions and our character encounters and our restaurants the same as everyone else? And including waiting in line. Like, they were intentional about going back and retrofitting the queues to make sure that everybody got the same experience regardless. Because earlier on in the age, if you had for example, if you were bound to a wheelchair, you got to go in the exit line, and it was, it called attention to you, right? And so they want to make sure that wasn't an issue. And now you had to do transfers. Now they have boats and stuff where you can just roll wheelchairs right onto the boat. It's really cool. So that's kind of where I got my start. And Disney's slogan back then was RAVE, respect and value everyone. And working at Epcot, coming from South Louisiana in a military family, going to Epcot in my first day in the cast cafeteria, I'm looking around like going, oh, this is the most diverse room I've ever been in. You've got Mexican, Norwegian, Japanese, Chinese, Italian, German, UK, Canadian. Like, it's like, whoa, okay. And it stood out because those cast members were in costumes from those countries, right? So it was in your face, the diversity. And then I was like, this is awesome. And ever since then, it's just been something I'm passionate about. It was such a cool experience learning and getting different people's perspectives, not from where they came from and how they looked at America and our way of life and what we do things and how they look at life differently than, in every country, everybody's different. And it's so cool. We should celebrate that. That's what makes our world so freaking amazing.
You're spot on, and you were blessed with that transformation that you had from Disney, another outlier organization in the D&I space, by the way, in terms of just inclusiveness with their employees as well as obviously the guests. But I'll share this with you. Just like you had that transformational experience where you learned about other cultures and you went through this, like, wow, this is so cool. I want to invite others, those in your listening audience, to do the same, to step out of their comfort zone, do something different. And if they're open minded about it and just take it for what it is and see people for who they are and not judge them by that, we all have unconscious biases. So check those judgments at the door, if you will, just like you did through your transformation at Disney training. I can guarantee you that you will have just as much fun, you and the listening audience, that you will embrace and you will understand. And that's going to translate into helping you, if you're a realtor listening to this, help you transform your business. Because that's where the growth is, Kevin. As a business leader in this industry, the growth is in those multicultural, diverse communities when it comes to who's buying more homes, who needs to be served more on purpose, if you will, when it comes to ensuring that their needs are being met. Like Disney did with the ADA compliance notion that you just talked about. Like they proactively made sure that they were ADA compliant. Guess what? Now the law's caught up to all the other companies, and they're like, okay, how do we make our parks and places, locations ADA compliant? Well, Disney was ahead of the curve, and you were blessed to have that training, and it's changed your guiding principles, your mindset. So great. What I'm encouraging others to think about is they could have their own sort of Disney experience if they're intentional, if they on purpose look for those different type of experience. It was given to you. So kudos to you to embrace it and to be a part of it for so long, because I could see, and I think most of us can hear that it's part of your guiding principles. It's who you are, how you lead. That training helped you, especially because it sounds like you maybe grew up in an environment that might have not been as diverse. So then you went through a culture shock like most of us do, like I certainly did as an immigrant coming to the US, not speaking the language, not understanding the culture. But then now I'm in a position just like you are. We absolutely love it, embrace it. It's made me a better person, just like it's made you. And I'll encourage your listener to think about doing that to make them a better leader and a more inclusive leader to grow their business.
Yeah, I grew up mostly, my dad was military, so we moved around a bit, but most of my childhood was spent in New Orleans. And New Orleans is a diverse city, but it is definitely still very segregated as far as what nationalities live in which areas, right? So, and I did go to a Catholic school, and it, looking back, I can't remember one African American, any non-white people in my school, right? So it was a smaller school, but my parents are very definitely. I'm very blessed with them. You welcome everyone. Everybody's the same. You treat everybody with respect. I love my mom. She tells a story. They decided to retire to this little town in North Mississippi. And I'm not trying to judge Mississippi, put that out there. And it was a very heavy Caucasian area, but they were out in the country, so they would go into town. And my mom waved at someone they knew who happened to be African American, and the lady that she was with, she's like, "Why are you waving at him? He's not one of us." And my mom just ripped her a new one. So my mom is like, she broke that friendship instantly, But we still have pockets that are very, in our country, that are very, judgmental, and it's unfortunate. So I had a great family. I was brought up the right way. It's just where we lived, we're from, which is why I wanted to move. I wanted to get out of South Louisiana, and Orlando is a very diverse city, right? And after Disney, I worked for Hilton, so we got to meet guests from around the world running hotels here in Orlando. My last job with Hilton Worldwide University, we were the training team for all the hotels. So on my team, I had someone who lived in the UAE. I had someone who lived in France and in Spain and in Singapore. So, and we only had 10 members on our team. So we're a small team, but a very globally stretched out team. And so it was just amazing to, every year we got together for our team meetings in person, and also, our team building stuff, and then just our Zoom calls. It was just, incredible to see the diversity. And that's what I love it. And it was nice to have those different outlooks and those different perspectives. I said earlier, that's what makes us who we are. Nobody has, no one race or age group or political party or nationality or any of those have a monopoly on great ideas. It's when we take all of these diverse opinions, these diverse ideas, we bring them together, that it becomes amazing. Epcot, they used to have a show called Illuminations at the end of the night, and they used to open up with a narration, and it's like, we gathered tonight around the fire to share the light and to share a story. And he goes on, and though we all have our own individual stories to share, when we bring them together as one story, a true adventure emerges. And then that's how they kicked off the show, and it's so true.
Yeah, that's amazing. That, by the way, I commend you because you've seen that. Like you made a conscious, purposeful decision to bring diversity into your world because it sounds like you grew up in a non-diverse environment, and then you moved to Orlando, right? And then you obviously through your work experiences, you embrace and you just felt the goodness of like, my God, when all this happens, when everything is combined into one, so much goodness happens not only for humanity, but also for business and for just overall personal development. I commend you because you made a conscious choice. Like you were mindful enough to say, wait a minute, there's something missing here. And you made the choice to look for that, and then you embraced it as soon as you received it, and you were open to it. And I encourage others to look at life and their own journey the same way, to make their own conscious choice as to, okay, is my world diverse enough? Is my business diverse enough? Is who I'm hanging around with diverse enough? And if it isn't, and you're asking yourselves those critical questions, then you may want to step into the journey that you've had the pleasure of going through, Kevin, to say, you know what, let me do something different off the beaten path and see how cool it is and how it can help you with so many aspects of your life. So kudos to you. And I just hope and wish that many in your listening audience would embrace and follow your lead to do the same, because I can guarantee that they will have the same experience you will. Guarantee, I can almost promise it, if they're open to it, to say, wow, how beautiful, how cool this is, and how this is helping me grow and be more effective as a leader, as a son, as a brother, as a father, whatever, daughter, sister, whatever the case may be.
So one final thing that I wanted to ask. 21% of our pod, we talk about the 121% rule, the 21% is action. So if I'm a broker or an agent, what are one or two things I could take away from today and go do today to start my journey?
I want to underscore the two things that I mentioned earlier, then I want to build on them. One, take an internal action to make a choice to educate yourself about others. And then externally, step out of your comfort zone, start going to events, start thinking about understanding different cultures, especially those that are involved within the marketplace that you're looking to serve. The third thing that I would call out, and I hate to give a shameless plug to Century 21, but I will in full disclosure, is that you associate yourself with a brand that can help you make those choices a lot easier. And that's where we're an outlier in the industry. Kevin, you and your firm are an outlier in the industry as well. So I would encourage that practitioner to make that conscious choice to take their practice to an organization, to an environment that has the sense of belonging so that they could reach their potential. When you don't do those type of things, you're only making it harder for yourself to embrace the diversity and live with the diversity. So partner up with a team, partner up with an organization, partner up with a broker, with anyone that can help you reach your potential. And you'll do that with an inclusive leader that helps you understand you for who you are and what you bring to the table.
Absolutely. Well, Cesar, this has been a great chat. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. This is our first virtual interview. We've always done everything else here at the office, so thank you for that. If you are listening to us on one of your favorite podcast apps, please do us a favor and make sure you leave us a review. It helps get the algorithm going and getting our podcast in front of more people. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you have not done so already. And then, of course, if you want to take that first amazing step towards diversity inclusion, that's hitting the like button. That will definitely help give you some good luck and some good mojo and get you going on that journey. So, Cesar, thank you so much once again for joining us here on the 121% podcast. To our listeners and to our viewers, have a great rest of your day, your week, or wherever it is that you are right now. Always go out there, deliver those extraordinary experiences, defy mediocrity, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.